All right, so today I want to talk about drag and drop, the drag and drop API that is built right into HTML5. So very easy for us to use. Now what I'm going to do is I've got a sort of working example here with very basic things, the minimum requirements. I'm going to walk through that, then I'm going to update it to make it a little bit more complex, and then I'm going to look at some alternate syntax and some of the newer capabilities that have been added in. All right, so first of all, we have here an area that's got a bunch of elements that I can drag, and this is my drop zone. This is the place where I can put them. So I can click on this, I can drag it over. I'm putting some content into here when I drop it. I can drag, if I release it someplace else, it goes back to the origin. You can see here, this was a link, and so I'm getting the text of the link and the URL is showing up inside of there. If I drag this one, it's a copy of the text that I'm getting, and this one, it's like a copy of the image, a ghost version of the image that's being dragged and dropped. So we're going to take a look at all of this stuff. And first of all, we're going to look at the events. So when you are working with drag and drop, there's several events that you absolutely have to have handlers for this to work properly. So this is the HTML that I'm using. I've got my cards section. This is where all the draggable stuff is. And here's my drop zone. I just gave it the CSS class drop zone. That's just for CSS, and so I can identify it on the page. There's nothing required here about this name or anything like that. Same thing here. The class name's draggable that I'm using here is just for my CSS, and so I can identify things. This attribute, however, right here, draggable equals true. This is something that you absolutely have to have in your HTML to be able to do this. If you want to move an element from one place to another, you have to set draggable to true. Now, I don't have to have something that's draggable with my content inside of it. I decided to do that because I've got different things inside of each one of these. So one's a paragraph, one's an anchor, a couple of them are images. So to make it a little bit easier for me to manage and do some additional things later on, I decided to have the container as the thing that I can drag, and then we've got the content inside that. We could have just put draggable on the paragraph or on the anchor or on the image, and that'll work as well. I'll show you why in a little bit, why we're breaking it up into these sort of two parts. All right, jumping into the script. My DOM content loaded event that fires once the HTML is loaded. Here are the three required event listeners that you have to have. And I could have gone and found everything with the class draggable and the thing with the class drop zone and put the listeners onto those, but it's easier if I just put them on the body element. Then inside my function, I can look to see, okay, the thing that's being dragged or dropped, is it one of those draggable or droppable objects? So drag start. This is when you have clicked on an element and you move your mouse without releasing it. Or on the trackpad, you're clicking and then you're moving it without releasing. So here, I click and I start to move. That is the drag start event. So if I refresh this, we'll see the event come up here. When I drag, there it is, the drag start event over here in the console. And we've got drag enter, drag leave. So I dragged into that drop zone and then I dragged it out of the drop zone. Those are the other two events that are taking place here. So that's drag start. You've clicked and you're starting to drag. Or on a mobile device, you've tapped and you're starting to drag. Drop, well, that's when you let go of it. So here I'm dragging, and if I let go of it here, that's a drop. If I come over here and I let go of it, there we go. Now, because my function said you're dropping it in a place that I care about, that's why I'm writing this out. It's not that it's not a drop event someplace else. It's just that here, the drop event is taking place in an area on my page that I have designated as my drop zone. Okay, so we have drag start and drop. Drag over is the other one. We have to have listeners for these three things. These are the ones we're going to talk about in a second. These are also useful, but we don't have to have them. These three must be there in addition to the draggable attribute in the HTML. If you want drag and drop to work and be able to control it with JavaScript, you have to have these. So my start, what am I doing inside of here? So here's my handle start function when the drag start event happens. I'm getting the target event. Okay, so this is the thing that is being dragged. If my object is not inside of something with the class draggable, or is not an element with the class draggable, then I'm exiting the function. And I'm doing that because I come over here, the listener's on the body, but if I click and drag on this thing, this isn't a draggable object. I don't want the drag start function to do anything. Here, this is a draggable thing, so if I click and start, yeah, okay, that is a drag start that I actually care about. So that's what we're doing right here. And I'm doing this in all of my functions to know whether or not am I dealing with one of the draggable objects. Now, this is an extra little bit that I have to put in here. If I had put the draggable on just the paragraph or the image or the anchor tag, if that draggable attribute was there, I wouldn't have to do anything else. But because I have a paragraph inside of here, I'm dragging the paragraph along with the div. But the div is the thing that JavaScript is saying, hey, that's the thing that you're actually clicking and dragging. But I could have been clicking on this. I could have been clicking on the anchor to start it dragging. There's some content over here that's not actually part of my anchor tag. There could be space around the image. I'm clicking on the div as opposed to the image. So just to make sure that I'm clicking the image or its container, either one of those, I want to keep track of which thing is my object. My object is the paragraph, the image, the anchor. I want to know those because I'm going to use the element that's I'm really trying to transport. The div with the class draggable, that's my box that I'm using to carry this thing over in. And it's the thing inside the box, the paragraph, the image, the anchor. That is the thing that I want to know all the details about. So right now, I'm writing out drag start, and I'm creating some content to actually transport over. So the event, the drag start event, has access to a property called data transfer, and the data transfer object is the thing that will contain any information that I want to bring. When I drag something, when I start here and I drag over, I have this data transfer object, and we can see here inside of it we've got all of this stuff right here, and I'm going to be saving stuff inside of items. So we call the function here setData. We have to provide a data type, a MIME type, and this is the information that I'm saving in there. So I'm saying create an item inside of here in my data transfer object. This data type, this is the data. Now when I drop it, so my handle drop function, when that fires down here, I'm going to make sure, hey, are you dropping it on the drop zone? Yes, okay, great. Then in that case, I need to prevent default. This tells the browser, hey, don't do what you would normally do. Like if somebody is dragging something from outside the page onto here, or if somebody has dragged something from somewhere on a page, don't do what you normally do. I'm going to give you explicit instructions on what I want done here. So we are going to write out the message drop, and I'm writing out this object so I can see all the details. That's just to demonstrate it. We don't have to do that, but I'm going to call getData. This is going to read this text plain information. So the same data type in both places. This string right here, some data, that's what I'm going to get back as data. And in my drop zone, I'm going to add that string onto the text content of my drop zone. The drop zone is right here, just this div. So inside there, I'm going to write this string, which is some data. And it happens for any one of these. Some data, some data, some data. If I changed this to say no more data, now when I drag it, that's the piece of information that is copied over. Okay, so not very useful at this point, but this is the basic functionality. We're dragging this stuff over, and we can use setData to save some information. We use getData to retrieve that information. And then if we want, we can write that information out onto the page. I'm also removing a class called over, which I added right here in my handle over. This was the other event, the other required event, handle over. Inside of there, I'm adding the class over, and all that does, it's adding a CSS class. So when I move over this, you can see the gold border that appears. When I go off, go back on, I'm changing the background color, I'm changing the border color, just so I get some visual indication, or the user gets some visual indication that, yes, this is a drop zone, this is a place where you can drop your elements. Okay, now, handle over, handle drop, and the drag start. Those were our 3 required ones. The other events, mouse down, I'm using that right here. When I move over this, when I click on it, it gives me an opportunity. I can change. You can see right now the hand on this lower image. My cursor is a little open hand. When I click, I've changed it now on that image to be the closed hand. Now I don't change it back to the original in my code, so when I go back on, it is the closed hand again. But that's just to demonstrate that the mouse down could be an opportunity for you to change some CSS about this element. For example, the cursor could be changed at that point. Drag enter, similar to drag over. The difference between the two of them is drag enter fires one time. So when I first enter the drop zone, drag enter fires once. Drag over fires continually. I think it's every 20 milliseconds or something like that. I can't remember exactly what the number was. But when I move over this, the drag enter fires one time, but as I'm moving around here, the drag over is firing continuously. So let's uncomment that right here. So handle over. This is the drag over event. It fires continually. The handle enter, which is the drag enter, this one fires one time. So I save that, come back. If I drag this over, we'll see drag enter happen one time, but look at the numbers in the console. You can see it's going up and up. It's firing, even though I'm not moving. It is continually firing this drag over event. Because of this, drag enter is probably a better place to put any changes to the CSS for the drop zone, like I'm doing right here, which was adding the class over. I'll comment it off here on the over because that's the one that fires again and again, and I'll just do it down here. I'll only do it inside of the enter. There we go. So now it still works, but it fires one time. And then when I drop, I'm removing that over class. And leave, I'm also removing it. So if I've moved on top of it, like this, and then I come out the other side, you can see the class has been removed. And when I drop, the class has been removed. Okay, so that's the fundamentals. That's how drag and drop works with the set and get of that data that you're passing on. Now my data, it's not very useful, the information that I'm passing over. I can actually take the information from here. I could take a reference to this thing, or I can put some sort of reference inside these elements so I can find them later on. Oh, actually, before I do that, one other thing. When you're moving this, the default, so there's the text, here's the link, here's the image. If you want to do a custom element or a custom image when you're dragging it, you can do that. It doesn't work on iOS, but it does work on all the other browsers. What we can do is we can come back up here into our drag start. And I'm going to come in here and we're going to call on EV data transfer, same object. There is a method called set drag image. Now this will accept an element, and then there's X and Y coordinates for the offset for the mouse. So from the top left corner, how far do you want to move the mouse pointer? Or if you took the inverse of the numbers, it would be how far do you want to move the image from the mouse cursor? Up and to the left. Yeah, up and to the left. So I need to have something that I'm going to put inside of here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create up inside of here a couple of elements. And one is going to be an image. And I've got variables for them right here. So up at the top of my code, I created an empty image and I created an empty span. Image element, drag element. So these two things right here, I'm going to actually define what they are. We'll say image element dot source is equal to, and I'm just going to take an image that I've already got in my folder, and I'm going to say that this image is the one that I'm going to use. So if I open up the console here, you can see I've got 3 dragon images. 2 of them are being used on the page. This third one, this is going to be the image that appears as I drag things. So we've got that image source. The other thing about this is it has to be on the page somewhere. So we're going to have to actually append it. To be able to be used for this dragging, it's one of the requirements that most of the browsers have, is that you have to have it somewhere in the DOM so that you can actually use it. All right, so we have an image added. That lets me use this. And in the CSS file, you can see here my image inside my footer, position absolute. I'm using a translate X to throw it off to the side of the page. So it's part of my DOM, it's just not visible on the screen. And the span, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to move it off to the side. It's got some other CSS properties as well. So this is the image, and I will create my drag element. Okay, so I've done the same thing for the image and for the span. If you come over here, refresh the page, there's nothing visible here. Now I have added an image, I have added the span to the DOM so that they are usable. And now that they are part of the DOM, I can use them in here. So we can say that we want to take image element or drag element that we built up here. And I'll just say 50-50 as my coordinates. Now, there it is. Here is the span that I'm dragging. Same effect, I get the same data here, but every one of these elements, I'm able to change it to something else that I've built. You don't have to use this hideous looking span for yours. You can do whatever you want. You can even change it depending on which one of the elements is being dragged from your page. And instead of drag element, if we wanted to, well, here, I'll just copy this. There we go, we'll use the image one instead. And there it is. There is my image number 3. And it's going to be the image number 3 regardless of which thing I'm dragging. Okay, so that is drag element. And like I said before, it doesn't work on iOS, but it does work on all the other browsers. Okay, so we have those. Now, using some data beyond just this phrase, no more data. Okay, now I can use set data as many times as I want. I can add text plain, text /HTML, text /URI list. So that's the one I believe by default that gets used for anchors when you're dragging them over. So the URL will be brought over. Or for images, the URL will be brought over as well. So both images and anchors, that's what you're going to get as the text. But another way that I like to do this is I work with JSON all the time when I'm dealing with APIs. Why not use that for this as well? So instead of doing this text plain, what we're going to do is we're actually going to use JSON. We're going to take the content and build some JSON, and then use that to transfer over to our drop zone. All right, up here, I have created a default object, and I'm going to use this. I've given myself a bunch of properties. Now, the names of the properties are not required or anything like that. This is just something that I decided to do. An ID, if I want to come up with a unique identifier. Maybe there's an ID number in the things that you're dragging that you wanted to keep as you move it over. The tag, was it an anchor tag, a paragraph tag, an image tag, some other kind of tag? Depending on what type of tag it was, there may be different information that you want to copy over. So my text field, for a paragraph, that's obvious. It's the text. For the link, like the Google link right here, the text Google link, that could be my text, and then the URL can go into this URL property. Timestamp, I'm going to get the timestamp at the moment the person clicks and starts to drag. I'm going to grab the current timestamp. I'm going to save it here in this object that I'm creating. I'm going to take this object, I'm going to put it into my data transfer object so it gets sent over. But I'm also going to take that same timestamp and I'm going to put it into the thing that I'm dragging. So this paragraph, when I click and start to drag, I'm going to get the current timestamp and put it in here. So when I drop this, I now have a way to identify which one of these things was just dragged. Because every time I drag one of these, it's a new timestamp that's being set on the element. So I can use that to identify the original thing that was grabbed. Now, if I want to actually copy it, I can do that. If I want to remove this so it looks like it's being moved, I can clone it, put a copy of it over here, and then delete the original. Now, you don't have to have all these things. If you only want to do the timestamp so it's just sort of a move, you can do that. If you want to grab a whole bunch of information, you can do that as well. So, inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build up my data object based on the thing that is being dragged, and then I'm going to save the timestamp in that original object and take my JSON and save that inside of my data transfer object. Okay, so obj. This is the thing inside the draggable container. So it's the paragraph, the anchor, or the image. So on that thing, I'm going to place, or I'm going to retrieve the tag name and save that inside my data object. Then the text. We're going to get the element that we're wanting to move over. I'm going to look to see, does the thing have text inside of it? An image won't, but an anchor and a paragraph will. So if it does, then the obj.textContent, that's the thing that I'm going to be putting inside there. If not, we're going to look for the alt text. So it's an image. So I've got image, anchor, and paragraph. Two of them have text content. The images do not. So I will get the alternate text instead. So we'll look at that. If it does exist, then we'll get the alternate text. Otherwise, it's an empty string. So nested ternary operators to do this, if you haven't seen that sort of syntax before. So this is the test we're doing to see if that exists. If it does, we're using it. If not, we're going to look for alt. If that exists, we use it. If not, it's an empty string. Next, the URL. And we're going to do the same sort of thing that we just did. We're going to look for an href, and if there is an href, we'll use it. If there isn't, then we'll look for the source. So for the images. If there is, we'll use the source. If not, we'll set it to an empty string. Timestamp. We'll just use date.now. That's our current timestamp. JSON.stringify. We're going to stringify what we're putting inside of here. And now we can use ev.dataTransfer, same as we were doing before. And we're calling set data. But the data type isn't just going to be plain text. Or we could actually, because we are doing JSON here, we wouldn't necessarily have to stringify this. Oh, yes, sorry, we do. Yes, absolutely, because JSON is a string format. There we go. There's the data. Now, last part of this. So we have taken all this information, put it into one object. We've stringified it so that it is JSON, the JSON string. We're putting it inside of our data transfer to send it over so we can retrieve it. The last step is we want to take that timestamp and we want to put it inside of one of these HTML elements. So we're going to create something inside of there. And there it is. So I am creating an attribute called data ts for timestamp. I'm going to take this timestamp and I'm going to stick it inside that object so that later on I can actually retrieve it. Okay, so we have saved this. Now if I come back over here, when I drag and drop this, inside of here, inside the items, we've actually transferred some JSON over there. And if we want to see it now, we have to go to our drop function right down here. And we're going to, instead of doing get data with the plain text, here we'll copy it. There we are. Now we've got this JSON data retrieved. Now, it is going to be a string. If we want to use it as an object, we'd have to do the conversion as well. But there we go. Here is the string, and we can see it had the ID. We didn't change that. P was the tag that we dragged. The text, there's the text from it. The timestamp, and it had no URL. If I do the anchor, there we are. It's the anchor tag, and it has a URL. If we do one of the images, there's the other version. Okay, so we are getting this data being transferred over. Now, if we want to do something different than just this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use that timestamp that we set right here. That timestamp is going to be used with query selector to target the thing that I clicked to drag over. So down here, we're going to be able to say, so draggable, that's going to be the element that we started dragging. We want the timestamp attribute, and we want to use the one, and actually I'm going to use backtick characters here so I can use interpolation, template strings. I want to get the one that is matching the one that was just dragged. So I need to get from this data the timestamp. Now I have to convert it from the string back to an object to be able to use it, which to do that, all we have to do is wrap this one line in json.parse. And now it's an object instead of just a string. And inside of here, scroll that back. Inside of here, we're just going to say data.timestamp. That is the property. If we look down inside of here, timestamp. This is the property that we're trying to get. We want to get this value because right here, this was this image that I dragged. This image now has that timestamp. If I was to look into the elements, go into main, in my cards, find the third one here. Here's the image, and there's that timestamp. Ends with 2704, 2704. So we have put that timestamp into here. So this is our connection between the two sides of things. So we've parsed it, We're going to say, go find the element that has that. That is the thing that I've actually dragged. Now what do I want to do? Well, why not copy it? Let's create a copy of this image that we can place over here. So we'll use our built-in clone node method. So draggable. That's the original thing that we had start drag on, or drag start. And we're going to go deep. We want to copy everything inside of it, just in case there's some other HTML inside there that we want to bring over. And then drop zone. That's where we're dropping this thing. It's going to append our clone. Okay. Image, click, drag, release. And there it is. Paragraph, click, drag, release. Link. And then the other image. So this works. Now, we're making copies of it, which is great. If we wanted to do a move instead of a copy, we could do this. We can say, you know what? That original thing, draggable, once I've cloned it and copied it, I could remove it. Built-in DOM method remove. And now we can only drag them once because we remove them as we drag them. There we are. Okay, so that's even more of how this works. You now know how to drag, drop, how to copy, how to move, all of those things. The one other part of this, there's one other set of abilities that we have here. Right now we've been doing set data and get data. To do that, we need to know what the data type is. If you're ever in a situation where you might not know what the data type is, instead of trying to guess all of them and testing all of them, there is another way that we can do this. So back up to the top, inside of our drag start, instead of doing it this way, we are allowed to add multiple bits of data. We can call set data multiple times. We can also go through and look at all of the things that have been added. Now we're calling set data once. If inside of here, I look at the items object, I can loop through all of the items that are inside of there. So if we look at one of these objects, you can see items, data transfer item list. It says length is 0 here, but in actuality, we do have the ability to get into this items object and look to see what is there. Right here, we can loop through this, and this is on drag start after we have called set data. So down inside of here, we're just going to write out what one of the items is, what each of the items are. So items is an array. My item variable is going to point at each one of these in turns as I go through the loop, and then we'll just write them out. And we have a couple of properties here. Kind is going to be string or file. File only appears in Chrome on desktop. It doesn't work anywhere else that I'm aware of right now. It's specifically for being able to drag files into the browser. It doesn't work on mobile. Type is going to be application/JSON, text/plain, and so on. It's the MIME type. So kind is generally going to be string. And then there's going to be a method that we can call getAsString, which will retrieve the data for us. Instead of calling getData, we'll be calling getAsString. Okay, so we'll take a look here. As my paragraph, I drag it over, and there it is. When I drag the paragraph over, 0 was the index number, string, and there's the type. So string as opposed to file, and that is the MIME type. If I do the anchor and we drag that over. Now with the anchor, we got 4 things here. So the anchor was actually giving us URI list plain HTML. So the browser was trying to give us as much as it possibly could about that anchor tag. It's saying, okay, there is a URL, so I'm going to give it to you as a URI list, because maybe there's more than one URL in this thing. Text plain is going to be the text that was there. The HTML is going to be an anchor tag, and then the application JSON is what we did. It's what we added. So the paragraph only had what we made. The anchor tag had all of these things. And if I drag over an image, again, we get this long list. So the URI list, file, because I'm on Chrome on desktop, I get this one. And then string, which is the HTML, the actual image tag. And then we've got here the application JSON that we made ourselves. So you can see with all of these different parts in here, you really do need to know what it is that you're looking for, or you have to loop through them. So when our drop command inside of here, in our drop function, what we could do down here, I'm going to just comment a bunch of these other consoles out. Okay, so those are commented out. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to sort of repeat what we did before with the loop. I'm just getting the length of that just to make my for loop a little shorter. Okay, so item represents each one of these items. Each one of them can have the kind be string or file, and it's going to have a data type. So we can look at these things and then create a series of if statements that's going to look at each one of them and decide, hey, do I want to do something with this data type or this data type or this data type? Instead of having to write logic to test the different ones, we know we're getting all of them this way. So I can say, all right, let's test out the HTML kind. Then decide which we want to do with that. You can test text/plain. You can test the URI list. Or what we did right here, the only thing that I'm really caring about in this example is my application/JSON. Okay, so as I mentioned in the comment there, get as string is the new thing. Instead of using get data, like we did right up here, we're going to use this asynchronous method. So item get as string. This is going to accept a callback function right here, and the callback function is going to give us one thing, and that is, what is the data that's coming out of here? So what is the JSON data that came out of this item? And once we have that, we'll call our json.parse, same as we did before, and pass in our variable that we got. This isn't a keyword, this is just a variable. And then just to show that it's working, there we go. We'll save that, we'll run it. And as I drag each one of these over, we'll see the JSON part of this is working, and it is giving us the timestamp for each one of these. Okay, and that's it. That's the basics, the bare bones. It's being able to do a little bit more with the get data, set data, and putting some identifying mark inside of each one of these things every time they're dragged so that we can refer back to them. So then if you want to copy it, if you want to move it, you have the ability to do that. And then the final thing is this new way of doing things using data transfer items instead of just the get data method that we were doing before up here, which allows us to loop through. And if you are writing something for the desktop for Chrome, it does give you the ability to look at the kind and say, hey, this thing is a file, and then handle that in some other way. All right, so that's everything. Hope that helps you out. A copy of all this code is going to be in a code gist linked to down in the description. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.